At the same time, Japan and South Korea relations is a very dynamic, seen by lots of seen from lots of dimensions. So it is a timely moment to discuss about that. For that reason, we are very privileged to have Prof. Kimura Kan from Kobe University in our lecture today. As mentioned, Kimura Sensei is a professor at Kobe University, Graduate Schools of International Cooperation Studies, and has previously been visiting scholar at world's top universities and institutions, such as Harvard University, Australian National University, Korea University, University of Washington, and Sejong Institute in Korea. As an expert of Japan and South Korea relations, Kimura Sensei has published more than 20 books, including Burden of the Past, which was published by the University of Michigan Press in 2019, and wrote many articles in Japanese, English, and Korean. So today, Kimura Sensei will not only explain the history and the development of Japan-South Korea relations, but also will help us understand the consequences of Japan-South Korea relations on Southeast Asian region, which Indonesia is located. So without further ado, Kimura Sensei, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. My name is Kan Kimura. I'm a professor of the Kobe University, as Rafi explained. Rafi is from the Ura University, but at the same time, up now, she is studying under my supervising. So in that meaning, in the double meaning, I'm very happy to have this kind of chance to have a guest lecture in front of the Indonesian student. But before starting that, sometimes we said that the Americans start their lecture with saying joking. But Japanese is going to start saying something with making a sorry for things. Today's sorry things. I have three stories. Now, one story is originally I understand that you intended to invite some professors from the so-called world top 100 university in Japan. It means that University of Tokyo or Kyoto University. So I tried to introduce some of my friends from that kind of the university, but unfortunately they were so very busy. So I couldn't make it. I'm very sorry about that. This is one thing. And the second thing is, well, my English. As you understand, as you found, my English has a very deep Japanese accent. As some of you has a very deep Indonesian accent. But anyway, so during my talk, there may be some kind of process. It's very hard for, especially the Indonesian student to understand. If so, I'm very sorry about that. So we are going to have the question and answer session later. So if there are something you cannot understand in my explanation, please never have any hesitation to ask me anything about that. Okay, the last thing is the topics. Frankly speaking, I am not a specialist of the international relations regarding on the Southeast Asia countries, especially about Indonesia. So all the things I can do is to explain the situation between the relation between Japan and South Korea, because it is my major, and trying to use the cases of the Japan-South Korea relation to get kind of hints or lessons to understand what's going on in today's international society and its possible impact to ASEAN countries or Indonesia. But I am not sure whether this is a suitable theme or the other guest lecture at the university. My last story is that if my topic is not so suitable, it's my fault, and so I'm very sorry about it. Anyway, let me start my today's lectures. Okay, can you see the screens?
Yes, Sensei, we can see that.
Okay. I'm just given the almost 30 minutes, so I don't think that I can talk all everything about my preparations and the preparations on my slides. So if you are really interested in the very detail about the data or kind of things, if possible, please upload the file also on the chat site for the people to be able to download it. But anyway, I'd like to start my talk from this kind of things. This is the story. My story started from the 2013. In South Korea, the Madam Park Geun-hye was elected as a president, the former president in South Korea, and she said that the international situation in East Asia is very strange because we are having the more and more mutual exchanges, not just in trade, but also in finance, money, and people. But we are having more and more dispute each other, not just between Japan and South Korea, but also between Japan and China, and between Japan and China and South Korea. And every part in the relationship with our neighbors, we are going to see the more and more difficulties. As you may be finding some kind of situation around like the issues in South China Sea or something like that, right? So the Madam Park Geun-hye president at the time called it Asian paradox, because many people expected that we are going to have a smoother relations after getting a more international exchanges in the age of globalization. But the reality seemed to be very different from our expectation in the early 2000s. So she said that we need to find a way of solutions. But she found that one of the reasons for the difficulties in the Japanese side and started to criticize the behavior of the Japanese politician. But anyway, I don't think that the Madam Park Geun-hye's, the Madam President understanding was right in the meaning of in the meaning that she has a very perfect understanding of the international relations in this region. But well, her question was very, very important, even at the time today. Actually, we are seeing the more and more difficulties, although in the age of the globalization. Why? Okay, and that this is the situation between Japan and South Korea, between Japan and China. Although we are having more and more cooperations and exchanges, especially before 2019, I mean, before the COVID-19 situations. But the people's understanding, the feeling each other between Japan and South Korea and between Japan and China is going to be worse and worse. And even in 2022 today, this situation is not changed at all. And the trend has not changed at all. So yes, we need to have explanations and our understanding about what's going on and what's the reason of our difficulties. Okay, so today I'm going to use the case of Japan-South Korean relation as a kind of case study to get a hint on what's going on today in this region, East Asia, in the broad meaning. Okay, this is the situation of the Japan-South Korean relations. You may know that we are having some kind of dispute regarding on the past issues, which was related to the kind of the events or incidents or tragedies at the time of colonial rule or World War II. But of course, it is very natural for the South Korean people to have a frustration about the things what the Japanese did at the imperial period, as the Indonesian people had the frustration. Right? But if we look back, the trends of the disputes, we can find a very curious and interesting phenomenon. Now, if the past issue itself is important, we have to continue to talk about the past issues since the end of 1945, more energetically, because it was more serious. But between Japan and South Korea and between Japan and China, the tensions or frequencies of the incident is going to be increasing since the 1990s. It is the age of the globalization. So Madam Park, the Madam President question was very good, right? We are not. We are having the question not even in the age of globalization. No, we are having this kind of dispute, maybe because we are in the age of globalization. Then what globalization mean to us? Okay? And sometimes this kind of situation was explained by the situation of the Japanese politics. Like they say Chinese or Korean people tend to say that we are having more and more nationalist movement since 1990s. So it was very natural for South Korean Chinese to react against that. But if we look back, the history of Japanese politics, 1990s were the heydays of Japanese liberalism. Like these are the persons, these are name of the prime ministers of the Japanese government in 1990s. Like Miyazawa was a champion of the liberal faction in LDP, and that Murayama was the leader of Socialist Party. He is only one of two prime ministers from the Socialist parties. Of course, it is nonsense to say Murayama or Miyazawa or Obuchi kind of person are more nationalistic than Abe or Kishi or that kind of the prime minister in 1970s or in 1980s. It is nonsense. So we cannot explain this kind of change just by the growing nationalist sentiment. Okay, then what's going on? Okay, we sometimes tend to understand that because the volumes of the trades or volume of the exchange is increasing, so our relations each other are going to be more and more important. But in the age of globalization, okay, exchanges in total of our exchanges in the international society is increasing, right? So it is very natural for us to see some kind of increasing on the amount of trade, for example, with South Korea or with China. Because it is just one of the trends, a part of the trend in the globalization. But the point is, how much we are important to our counterparts. Okay, this is the situation of South Korea. This is the data to have shown the share of the three major countries in South Korean trade. Blue line means Japan. Okay, this is very simple. I started to make this graph from 1965 to last year, and simply the share of the Japanese in South Korean trade had decreased from 40% in the 1970s to 7% in 2020s. It means that the economic importance of the Japanese whole South Korean, it has become almost 1/5 or 1/6 if compared with the 1970s. So the point is, in globalization never means that the situation that we are going to find more and more importance to our neighbors, because globalization is never equal to internationalization. Okay, so globalization means the kind of phenomenon in which we feel the growth, Earth, is going to be smaller and smaller, right? So in this kind of situation, the speed of the development of corporations with foreign nations like Brazil or South Africa or Mexico or I don't know, such kind of country will be rapidly growing. If compared with the exchanges with the neighbor countries, the neighbor country exchanges, we already have that kind of exchanges. So it is not so difficult, not easy for us to find more rapid development of the neighborhood relations, right? So so by the definition of globalization, in the age of globalization, we always have to see some kind of decline of the importance of neighborhood, which were much more important in the old days. This is one of the reasons why we have this kind of more dispute between Japan and South Korea. Okay, because originally we had a reason of the dispute, between Japan and South Korea because we had bad memories and bad history each other. So for the South Korean side, they have the reason to criticize Japanese histories and Japanese past, and they have the reason to have a frustration. But in 1980s, 1990s, when Japan was so important to South Korean economy, it was not so easy for South Korean people to raise the issue against Japan at the time. But now, the importance of Japan has become much smaller. So nobody tried to stop to criticize the people to criticize the Japanese at this moment. So we are going to have more and more criticism against Japan in South Korea, the more and more criticism, in China against Japan. Of course, the whole Japanese side, it is not so easy for us to understand that. The same kind of situation, more the clear situation can be found between Japan and China. Okay, of course, our trade with China is very rapidly increasing, increasing. So, for Japanese, okay, the share of the China in Japanese all of the Japanese trade is increasing. So we expect that, because for ourselves, our relation is going to be more important. We expect that China will also pay more respect to our relations. But this is a view from China, because we have a different speed of the development economy between Japan, China, and Japan. Japan is slow, and the China's economy is growing more and more rapidly. So the same trend of the amount of the trade between Japan and China, from Japanese side, it looks increasing, right? But from Chinese side, because they are much more rapidly developing, it looks like decreasing. The another kind of things, important point is because of the different speed of the development, our international relations, sometimes look very different from the other side. So here we have the reason to have a perception gap between two nations. Japanese people cannot understand, right? For example, please look at the share of the South Korean share in Japanese trade. For Japanese, it's stable. So, the importance of South Korea to Japan is almost equal, almost same in the situation since 1990 to today. So we don't understand for the Japanese people, it is very difficult to understand what's going on in South Korea. And for the South Korean people, it is very clear that importance of Japan is decreasing in South Korea. So they believe that it is very natural for them to say something against Japanese, but Japanese people didn't understand it because it looked different. Okay? And of course, this kind of perception gap have to be bigger between Japan, China, and of course between Japan and Indonesia too. Okay, and this kind of situation also is going on in the other regions. For example, this is the situation between the United Kingdom and the EU. Okay, the importance of the EU economy to the British economy is actually decreasing because they are also in the age of globalization. In 1990s, when United Kingdom entered to the EU, the EU market was much more important to them. So they had a reason to be in EU. But today, they are in the situation, it is less and more difficult to find a reason to have a cooperation with EU. So it can be a reason for them to find a way to go out from the EU system if they have the frustration. Okay? And of course, for Indonesia, you will see the same kind of situation. Even in the age of the globalization, the importance of the Asian market to Indonesia is never increasing, right? And if the if you feel back, if you think back about the situation in the 1990s or in 1980s, the ASEAN member countries like Singapore or Malaysia must have been much more important for the Indonesian economy and the Indonesian the international positions, right? But today, Singapore is not so important as it was important in the 1990s for Indonesia, because you have more variations of the international exchanges. So that's the reason why the EU people, ASEAN people are going to have more and more difficulty to have a cooperation with each other. This is the kind of my understanding. Of course, the second point is changing power balance. Because today I don't have so much time to talk about the details, so I'd like to explain it very quickly. Of course, this is the things you know very well, right? This is the GDP data of China, Japan, and South Korea. And it was in 2010 when, at the time, at the first time in the history of 150 years, Chinese economy first time had became bigger than Japanese one. It was just 12 years ago. But today Chinese economy was almost as big as 3 times bigger as Japanese one. So this kind of changing is very rapid. So it is very hard for the people to catch up, especially for the Japanese people. Japanese people still lived in the memories of that at a time when Japan was only economic giant in Asia, right? And we are also seeing the more and more exchanges in volume with China. So it is natural for Japanese politicians or Japanese people to have a very big influence in Asia. But that kind of situation cannot be found anymore between Japan and China. So this kind of is changing. And of course, it is not that situation we can find about China, but also on many Asian countries, right? The Indonesia and South Korea. Today, South Korea has the 10th biggest economy in the world, right? Almost same with Canada. Of course, it is that kind of the changing situation of after the growing of the Asian economy also had to change the international power balance like this. Okay, this is the situation about military expenditure. Well, surprisingly, until 2003, Japan had the biggest military expenditure in Asia. Just 18 years ago. That's 18 years ago. But now China has maybe as big as 5 times or 6 times as big as Japanese. Of course, we cannot compare. Japan cannot compete against China by ourselves anymore in this situation. Okay, but another kind of important situation is that again, that kind of changing power balance is not just happening between Japan and China. This is the kind of the data of the military expenditures of the Asian country without China, because China is too big. So if we see the more detail about the situation of military expenditure, now you find the Japan was not even the second biggest military power in Asia. Now Saudi Arabia and India have the much bigger military expenditure than Japanese, and also South Korea also has almost same amount of the military expenditure with Japanese. This also can be the reason for the South Koreans find a difficulty to have a cooperation even with the military part or security part. Japanese people still believe South Korea, although they developed, but their country is smaller than Japan. So we tend to expect that South Korea must be dependent on Japanese, even on the military side. But now South Korean people don't have that kind of understanding. They believe that they almost have the equal power with Japanese. So they want to have the equal status in international society or in Asia with Japan. But for Japanese, because the changing is too rapid, so it is very hard for us to catch up this kind of changing. Okay, and of course, this is not just because the South Korea or China, they try to make a very big effort for the military expenditure. No, simply because the economy is growing, and simply because their tax, the tax is growing. So the government having more and more money. So if we look back about the military expenditure per GDP or per government spending, we see that the percentage in China and South Korea are never increasing at all. Even in that kind of situation, because of the economic development, our international balance have to be changed so much dramatically like this. Okay, then as a result of it, what's going on in this Asia? Okay, again, we are going to back to the story of South Korea and try to check what they are thinking about. Okay, before I said that now South Korea people become much richer and much stronger, so sometimes they are not hesitating to criticize against Japan. But again, that kind of situation is not just happening between Japan and South Korea, because after that kind of situation, this atmosphere in South Korean societies are also changing. This is the data of the public survey to South Korean people, by asking which country is the most important for South Korea. In 2013 or 2015, you see that almost more than 30% of people, South Korean people answered, it might be China. Okay? It might be China. But today, after 2019 or 2020, the percentage of the people who answered that China might be the most important country for South Korea, the percentage is less than 20%, and the percentage is decreasing steadily. Okay, what's going on in South Korea? Okay, this is the data, economic side of data, the investment from South Korea to China. Okay, you see that the red line percentage in the total investment of South Korea to China. And in the early 2000s, from 2002 and 2008, the percentage was almost 40%. So they believe that China was the most important target economic exchanges. So they invested a lot of amount of money there. But the percentages of the investment in China is going down, and now just 7% or 8%, right? Because they believe that depending too much on Chinese economy is too much risky, not just for the securities, but for their economic stabilities, right? So the South Korean company like Hyundai or Samsung, started to hesitate to invest in China and started to increase more dependence to other Asian countries like Vietnam or Indonesia or India. And as a result of it, in South Korea, the years in which when the dependency to Chinese economy has already finished. So this is the dependency rate of the South Korean economy to China. You see the data is almost flat since 2012. Well, so it means that in South Korea, the booming to Chinese economy was already over 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Then, how are they finding their way to survive in the international society? Today, Yoon Song-yeol government used this kind of words to explain their international positions. The international positions, especially in Asia, they use the word global pivotal state. Global state. Okay. Until now, their views, the South Korean views on the international society were just limited to the East Asia, especially around the Korean Peninsula, because the Korean Peninsula situation was always very complicated because they have North Korea there. And of course, they have the very big pressure from China. China is so close to South Korean people, so they have the reason to be afraid of that. But they become bigger than early 2000s and 1990s. So they started to have the confidence in the international society. And their military expenditure almost has become almost equal to the Japanese one. Which means that their military expenditure is almost equal to Germany and France. So it is not nonsense for South Korean people to start to believe that if Japan can do something outside of East Asia, if Japan can do something in the international society at the G7 summit meeting, they have no reason not to do the same thing with Japanese. So they started to explain their kind of the ambition with the word of global pivotal state. But this is just starting of the beginning. So the last month, I had a chance to talk with my South Korean friends to ask about what are global pivotal states. And so they answered to me that, oh no, they are just thinking about that. No concrete answers. But the more important things, they are now in the situation to find that there are some ambitions. So, now you are seeing that South Korea have the much more broader international activity, like to export tanks and even fighters to Poland, other European countries. And also the South Korean people try to expand their network to ASEAN and start to say something about even the Taiwanese situations. Okay, but point is, the point of my today's talk is we sometimes tend to just pay attention to the increasing rivalry between US and China. But even in the alliance of the US side or Western side, we have a different kind of rivalry in the alliances. For example, we have the framework Quad, which was conceived by the US and Japan, India, and Australia to discuss about the security frameworks against China. Okay, but if South Korea have the ambition to join there, how can we have the new frameworks? And of course, this today's talk hold the Indonesia student. Indonesia is also another candidate to be this member of the influential countries in Asian security framework, right? Then, of course, at this moment, South Korean government didn't have a so solid understanding and a solid idea about what kind of things they can promote and what kind of the ideas they can promote to the international society in front of Japan or US and Australia and India. But kind of their activity, well, of course, strong South Korea is very helpful for our side to have a balance against China. But at the same time, such kind of the rising of new power can be a reason for us to find frictions among the alliance, right? So how to welcome the newly developing Asian country, like South Korea, like Indonesia, like Thailand, will be another kind of big questions in today's East Asian society. Because the Joe Biden, US president, is now saying something about IPEF, which might mean that US is going to invite more partners to the cooperation. But if we invite more partners, okay, but we have more members, like you expressed it by in ASEAN, okay? If you have just 5 members in ASEAN, the argument and the cooperation was much more easy, right? But after welcome Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, the cooperation has become much more difficult because they have a different kind of the political system, and they have a different kind of the level of the economic development. But now we are seeing the same kind of situation in the alliance. So South Korea, okay, not just in Asia, South Korea has ambition to say something even outside of Asia, like joining to the G7 summit meeting as a guest, or joining to the NATO meeting with Japan and Australia and New Zealand, right? But of course, for that, we need to prepare for the new kind of framework again. Okay, the point is, okay, how our international order in this age, in this society, is East Asia in broader meaning, I mean, Northeast Asia and South Asia, is going on after the changing of this kind of power balance, not just between US and China, but also in the side of Indian Pacific Cooperation. Okay, in the Cold War, we had one premises of our alliance. Each region has a solidarity, like Europe. Europe and US make alliance as a NATO, right? So in the NATO, of course, France has some kind of differences, but the Germany and the United Kingdom has a very strong leadership as a junior partner of the United States. And in Asia, okay, you have the ASEAN, and Japan was an important junior partner of the United States, and we had a pride to have played an important partner of the United States in this region. But in Asia, we are going to have more and more influential players like South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, but without any framework like NATO. I think the South Korean ambitions and South Korean challenge is the first real challenge against such kind of regional cooperation. And if we cannot make this kind of cooperation with welcoming the new power, like South Korea, of course, Indonesia may be another kind of noise, of the international cooperation. And Vietnam, of course, because they have very different kind of the political structures, and of course India, right? Okay, but we have to think about how we can control about 2 levels of the international changing. One level is between something like a new Cold War between US side and the Chinese Russian side, right? But in the US side, or even in Chinese Russian side, they had, if compared with the Cold War system, in the Cold War system, Soviet Union and the United States could control their team very easily. But today, no China can control Russia, no US cannot control maybe South Korea and Japan, Of course, no US cannot. No US can control India, right? So in this kind of the two levels games of the competence with a kind of mixtures of the new code kind of situation and a more multinational type of the corporation that we have to think about. We have to think about how to survive in this kind of corporation. So I'd like to share this kind of our problems from Japan, or our problem between Japan and South Korea to Indonesian friends too. Thank you so much for your listening. And again, I'm sorry about my broken talk. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Kimura Sensei, for the very insightful presentation. If I might summarize some of the important points of Sensei's presentation. So, firstly, it starts with help us to understand the background and the dynamics between Japan and South Korea relation, in which it is quite unique because Japan and South Korea have a lot of struggle to have a positive image towards one another, but at the same time, they are becoming more interdependent in so many fronts, such as in economic front or in the military aspect. And now they are in the middle of the power change in international relations. And also, from Korean perspective, Korea aimed to be a global pivotal state that aimed to change the power balance using its influence. That's why Korea start to have more participation and more voice in outsides of Northeast Asia, such as in NATO, G7, and more frameworks in Indo-Pacific, such as the Quad and IPF. And that also drops the possibility for ASEAN to have increasing strategic value in the middle of the global power changes. And if you're seeing from the chat box, we already have several questions from the students summarized by Dr. Ari. So I would like to read the first question. So the first question is from Aziza. The question is, we know that international relations nowadays currently talk about the area where Japan and Korea live, namely the Indo-Pacific region. There are many potentials and challenges in this region that made the countries shift their foreign policies to this region, such as the US, European countries, India, Australia, and even Japan, with its policy called Free and Open Indo-Pacific. So the question is, what exactly is Japan's national interest in Indo-Pacific region? Is it more for the defense interest or security interest, or it is more leading to the economic interest? So I think we should start with that, Sensei.
You ask about the most difficult things for Japanese people to answer. Of course, the most important things for today's Japanese diplomacy in the Pacific is a security issue, especially against the threat from China, because we have a dispute on the small islands called Senkaku Island, between as a reason of the territorial dispute with China. So many people are afraid of the escalation of the dispute. But at the same time, the islands were just located almost 30 kilometers or 50 kilometers from Taiwan, right? This is one of the very important things why we have the reason to be afraid of the situation, because Taiwan is very close to Japan, and also the Taiwan is located on the sea lane from Japan to Middle East. And you know that Japan is very much dependent on the oil from the Middle East countries, because now, perhaps because now we cannot depend on Indonesian oils. But anyway, so that's one of the reasons. And the second one is more nationalistic sentiment. As I explained, Japanese people have lived in the world for a very long time, more than 100 years. with having a pride as a big nation in Asia, right? So we believe that the people we are paid. We believe it is very natural for Asian people to have paid some kind of respect to Japanese people, Japanese company, or Japanese something, right? But unfortunately, now the world is not in that kind of situations. So, but we are going to regain that kind of international status, not just in the world, but also in Asia. So now we are looking at what we can do for Asian people and how we can contribute to the securities, economies in this region. This is the one of the reasons why we are saying the Japanese government saying the importance of the Indo-Pacific. One is for Japanese security. Second one is for our national status. Can I answer to your question?
Okay, Sensei, thank you for the answer. So to summarize, Japan's interests, the first one is for their survival because they need energy imports. So to secure the energy imports from the Middle East, so the Indo-Pacific region needs to be maintained stable. And also the other interest is intertwined between security and status. So to fortify Japan's prominence and status, Japan needs to show some contribution to improve the stability of Indo-Pacific region. So thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So the second question is from Ryan. Can you explain the impacts of COVID-19 to cooperation between China, Korea, and Japan?
Well, I think it's very big. It's big. For the South Korean people, the whole South Korean people, they have the reason to have some kind of confidence. Because not just because they have successfully controlled the situation of COVID-19, but South Korean is maybe one of the economy which didn't have so much damage under the COVID-19. For example, the company like Samsung, because the Samsung was led by semiconductor industries, and they rather had a kind of booming of the semiconductor industry under the COVID-19 situation, because there is a booming of the online demands, right? So it is one of the reasons why now they find some confidence, not just against Japan, but also against China. And the second one is that I'm not sure about the situation in Indonesia and the South Asian countries, but I'm feeling the miss of the Chinese economic development seem to have finished or seem to be start to finish, right? Because we have believed that, because Chinese economy has been growing up for more than 2 decades or 3 decades. So especially for the younger generation, like the student like you, of course you have lived in the situation to understand China will develop forever. Because Chinese economy has developed since before you were born. So you never know that China had a serious economic problems, in the near future. But now we are actually seeing the very big difficulties, not just about the control of the COVID-19, but also about the control of the economic activities, right? And they are never successful on the control of the COVID-19, and they are never successful on the control of the economies. It means that that kind of situation also can change our understanding. Like South Korean people started to think about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, South Korean people started to think, if someday the age of the Chinese development has over, so too much dependency to Chinese economy might be too much risky for them. So they started to increase the investment to China in the early 2010s or in the middle of 2010s. I think same kind of situation might happen in other Asian countries. And also, before the COVID-19 situation, for some countries like Myanmar or like Cambodia or like Laos, I mean that not so democratic countries, the Chinese system seemed to be look to be very successful and can be a very good model for their futures, right? Because at least they are economically successful and they might be also militarily successful, right? But now we are seeing the failure. So also you call the Lao people, Vietnam, the Cambodian people, Myanmar people. I don't think the Chinese model looks so brilliant as it looked 2 years ago. I think it will be a starting point of the big changing. So I'm also watching how you are seeing the Chinese future. If this can be the answer to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So to summarize, so the one of the unique impact is if you took an example of Samsung. So because of the COVID-19, there is an increasing demand of the semiconductor industries, because during COVID-19 many are going digital. So that's why South Korea have an increasing demand of online devices that leading to their increasing confidence, and that also reflect that lots of countries starting to prepare for the post-China era, because the Chinese model of development starting to be irrelevant to some countries. So that is some of the impact that Sensei has explained. And the next question is from Nurmala. So the question is, Japan has the free and open Indo-Pacific concept, and Indonesia through ASEAN has ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific concept. So do you think that these two concepts can work together, and what are the similarities and differences between these two concepts?
I think not me, but Rafi should answer to this question because you are the specialist of the comparison between Japanese and the Indonesian security policies. Well, I think similarity, explaining the similarity is very easy, because the Japan and the Indonesia are both island nations. So we are paying very much attention to the security in the sea. And Japan is going to want to play some kind of important role in the sea with some naval power. And we are finding that Indonesia is a very good partner to hold that kind of cooperations. And we believe that Indonesia also have the same kind of understanding. But as I explained about the Japanese concept in the Pacific, because Japan is simply located in Northeast Asia, our view is mainly on that kind of regions, especially on Taiwan, right? So for Japan, Taiwan is very important. But maybe for Indonesian people, or ASEAN people, in Japan, people had a kind of preparation to take the risk of the Taiwan Straits incident. But I don't think that the ASEAN country has a preparation to take that kind of risk if something happened between Taiwan and China. Because you have some distance from China, right? And maybe another kind of things is that whole Japanese, of course, Korean is important also. And also we also have the kind of eye to the more broader the cooperation with the United States and even in Europe. So if compared with the Japanese side, even today, Indonesian view is a little bit smaller and limited than Japanese view. because we are thinking the Indo-Pacific order in the concept of much broader situation in the international society. But in Indonesia, this is just limited to that's my understanding. But this is tend to be limited in this region and in the ASEAN. That might be the difference and the similarities. But at least between Japan and Indonesia, if compared with other ASEAN nations, it will be much easier for us to have ideas for the cooperation together.
Okay, thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So to summarize it again, so of course there are similarities and differences. Most of the similarities is that they have similar vision and similar ambition on the maritime aspect, because both Japan and Indonesia is maritime power. But there are differences in that, because both Japan and Southeast Asian, especially Indonesia, face different challenges. So Japan, with their free and open Indo-Pacific, has to deal with some challenges like Taiwan, but Indonesia, with other ASEAN members, might have different challenges with ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And if I might add a little bit, firstly, whether this can work together or not, it takes time to evaluate that. But what's clear is that both Japan and Indonesia have formally recognized each other's ambition. So they have formally admit that Japan supports the Asian outlook on it in the Indo-Pacific, and Indonesia welcomes Japan free and open Indo-Pacific. And both these two concepts are coming from a different background. So Japan, with the free and open Indo-Pacific, are coming from their ambition to protect liberal values, but Indonesia, with ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, focus more on the ASEAN strategic independence. So that's probably some addition that I can give. Okay, so we have another question. This is mixed between Japanese and English. こんにちは、はじめまして。コニタと申します。ご質問させていただきます。Is there any other efforts that Japan and South Korea do to strengthen its diplomatic relations? ありがとうございます。
Okay. Well, actually, we are having the diplomatic efforts to smoothen the relationship between Japan and South Korea, because the South Korean president had changed from Moon Jae-in to Yoon Song-yeol, and Yoon Song-yeol is from the Conservative Party. So, and they understand the cooperation with Japan must be very important to have a smoother relationship, or to keep the smoother the alliance with the United States. So one of our effort is, of course, we have two kinds of efforts. First one is the most important or serious problems between Japan and South Korea is the past issue. So now South Korean side is trying to find a way of the solutions of the situation which was made by the judgment of their Supreme Court. Because the Japanese side understand it is their domestic problems. So they are trying to find the answer. But at the same time, South Korean government the government is asking the Japanese side to have a little bit cooperations, because they are trying to make one foundation to cover the compensation for the victims at the time of the colonial period, by the money from, not by the taxes, by the money from the companies of the South Korea and the Japanese, of the Japanese. But now Japanese companies refuse to pay any money to South Korean foundation, because Japanese public opinion against South Korea is very bad, and also the trust to the South Korean government in Japan is very, very small today. So it is very hard for the Japanese company to believe the stabilities of their ideas of the solutions. So, but the South Korean government is asking the Japanese government to make a help to ask the Japanese company to pay some money, even just some money to that kind of foundation. This is number one. But the second thing is more important. At least I believe that the final answers, to finding the final answer to the final way of the solution between the past issue is very hard, because it is not so easy to find a final compromise between the nation once which ruled and which was ruled. Like it is very hard for Indonesia and the Netherlands to have the same kind of historical understanding on the colonial periods. No 100 perfect understanding each year. But so that's another kind of thing we are thinking, and we have to think about it, how to manage the situation and how to continue the cooperation, security or economic cooperation with having the different kind of historical perception each other. This is the thing that we are thinking about. So, but for that, we have to have a kind of the concrete idea of the security cooperations. Like, so we started the drill between the US, Japan, and military drill, military drill among three nations, US, Japan, South Korea, and even the military drill among four nations, including Philippines. Because if we have more members, the rivalry between Japan, the importance of rivalry between Japan and South Korea, the weight must be smaller, right? So, because it is nonsense for us to have a kind of to discuss about the past issue in front of Filipino people between Japan and South Korea. That's nonsense. So we are trying to work on more members to have a security cooperation. But I am not sure how much they are and we can be successful to have a smoother cooperation, But at least if compared with at the time of the Moon Jae-in government and the second Abe administration, I believe that our cooperation is going to be much more smoother. So we all already seeing some kind of the success of that kind of effort. It's my understanding.
Okay, thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So to summarize that, so there are two efforts that both government are doing to have a stronger bilateral relation between Japan and South Korea. The first one is to resolve the historical and past issues, because that's one of the core challenge. So that's why both governments are collaborating with the other foundations to help provide some feedback to resolve the historical issues. That's the first one. And the second one is to expand their security cooperation framework. So I think by having more partners, it's going to be easier for the two countries to have a better relations in other diplomatic aspect. Okay, so is there any other questions that want to be delivered directly, not through chat box? If there is one, please raise your hand using the facility. While waiting, I have my personal question that coming from me. So I was very interested about the global pivotal state by South Korea. So I was quite curious how significant is like the Korean wave or like K-pop and other cultural instrument to help South Korea reach the ambition to be a global pivotal state. So that's my question, Sensei.
Well, I also like to ask to the Indonesians, for Indonesian younger people about the impact of the pop culture from South Korea. I think that at the very beginning, the K-pop and pop culture can be a very effective vehicle for the people to know what South Korea is and how the South Korean society is, how can I say, good and the attractive. But the one thing we are learned in these 10 years are after that, it is not so easy for us to find positive the outcomes or positive influence of the positive and direct influence of the pop culture to the diplomatic relations, right? For example, we have the past issue like cold women or forced laborers. Then we have the some dispute about the territories like called Takeshima Dokdo Islands. But well, do you think that Japanese or South Korean people or younger people can say the Takeshima Dokdo territory island should be their own territory because they like the K-pop idols? It's nonsense. So in the world, like for example, in the Middle East, we see a very lot of people who are making the anti-US the demonstration with drinking Coca-Cola and wearing the jeans or something like that. I think this is rather very natural, right? Natural. And I don't think if somebody think that because they like sushi or they like kimono or they like the K-pop idols, so if they change the ideas on the past issues, nationalisms, or corporate or security, it's rather strange. It's never healthy. Pop culture should be enjoyed as a pop culture. Okay? When you are seeing the South Korean movie, appearing the South Korean idol, you should forget about this very complicated situation between Japan, South Korea, and Japan, China, or Xi Jinping, or Abe, or something like that. So again, at the very beginning, to let the people know about what South Korea, it is effective. But unfortunately, today, South Korean pop culture had become much more popular than some decades ago. So I don't think that they can have much more effect on the diplomatic relations. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So we have one more question that is going to be delivered in person. So to Mr. Nadif Fadlan, so you can unmute your microphone.
All right, thank you, Mas Raffi and Professor Kan Kimura. So my question is regarding tourism. Lately, I've known that South Korea, Japan, and actually one other Eastern Asian country is Taiwan. They are competing each other to get as many tourists, that they can get from Indonesia. And right now, they are, developing halal tourism industries, knowing that in nowadays era, halal has been becoming a big booming industries. So, what do you think regarding that issue, and and how is the constellation going between Japan and South Korea regarding tourism to get tourists from Southeast Asian countries?
Okay, thank you, Nadif, for the question. So Kimura Sensei, you might answer.
Is this a question about the impact of the South Korean tourism to Japan, South Korea, right?
So the question is how is like the dynamics between the Japan and Korea in competing to attract tourists from Southeast Asia?
I see. Well, I don't think that I'm not feeling we are competing to get more tourists from the Indonesia or ASEAN countries, because imagine the situation of East Asia. Japan has more than the 100 millions of populations. And South Korea has more than 50 million populations. And of course, China has huge, right? So the most of the international tourists to Japan and South Korea was from the inside of East Asia at this moment. And unfortunately, the Southeast Asian people at this moment are not so as rich as Taiwanese or Koreans. So of course, the other huge, very big, important target of our tourism or tourist industries, the Southeast Asia is a very attractive target. But at the moment, actually on the pop culture market, we are competing. We are competing, and from Japanese, that we are losing against South Korea, unfortunately. But on the tourism, okay, for example, I don't know how you are going to have a trip in East Asia, but imagine the situation. We have a travel to European countries. Are you going to just visit France? Or are you just going to visit Germany, some cities in Germany? No. We are going to visit around London, Paris, and Rome, and Frankfurt or something, right? So under Japan, under Tokyo, and Seoul, it's very close. We have the 1,000 kilometers distance, right? So I think that if we can attract the more tourists from Southeast Asian side, of course, it is natural for us to see the more flow of the tourists from South Asian country, both to Japan and the South Korea. Because once you visit Tokyo, maybe you have a mind to go to Seoul again next. And I think that we can make that kind of mechanism, and we have no reason to compete. About the tourists at this moment, tourists from Southeast Asia, or rather, we are going to make the more booming in South Asia about international tourism just before the situation of the COVID-19 in Asia. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you, Sensei, for the answer. So Japan and South Korea do not seem to compete in tourism aspect because the cake is quite big. Because Japan and South Korea can share that because the distance is quite close between Tokyo and Seoul. So they do not necessarily have to compete to get more and more tourists. And also in Northeast Asia themselves, the market for tourism is already quite big because there are huge population in China as well. So it doesn't seem to be a problem and to be made as a competition. So seeing the time, we are probably going to conclude the session. So to Kimura Sensei, do you have any like closing statement for the students who have probably some of the students are very interested to study in and to study about Japan. So Sensei, do you have any closing statement?
Yeah.
Okay, last thing I have to say is another story. Maybe Rafi had realized that. I showed a different slide set, different from I prepared. I'm sorry about. So if you want to know the more detail about my talks, you will access to my original slide, and you can ask to myself by email or something. I will welcome any questions. But the last thing I have to say is that while the international students are studying about the international relation in your countries, but the view from your countries sometimes can be very different from the view from the other countries.
Yeah.
Even when we are watching the same data, even when we are checking the same kind of the phenomenon, or because our situation is different, so our understanding can be very different, and so sometimes the mutual understanding between the people will be much more difficult. So if you are interested about international relation, please try to think about how the people, for example, in Thailand, how the people in China, how the people in Korea or Japan or the Europe and United States are watching our international society, and more important things, Indonesia, right? If you believe that their understanding or your countries are very strange, but even at the time, they have the reason to believe so. Okay, if you want to make your country to make the people to understand about your countries, you have to think about how you can make the people to share with the understanding with yourself. Because it is the things I am spending biggest effort between the Japan and South Korea. Even between Japan and South Korea, very similar and very close countries with having the similar kind of the political system, the similar kind of economic the level of economic development. We are having the very big difficulties for the mutual understanding. So this is one of the things the people who study about the international relation can do for the international corporations and our society. So please watch around your countries and please watch around what they are thinking about your country. Then you will have a very, big contribution to your country and the international society. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sensei. So it was the message. The message is to focus, to find the unique perspective from yourself, and especially from Indonesia, and from that you can enrich the discussion and the discourse in international relations. So to close the session, I would like to thank Kimura Sensei and also the international programs of international relations in Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta for hosting the session, and also the participants from both Indonesia and Japan. So thank you. I would like to close this the session. Have a good evening, everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sensei.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sensei, if you have other agenda after this, is it okay if you want to leave the room first?
Sorry, all I want to say is I mistakenly show the different slides. So
No problem, Sensei.
sorry.
I will share the like the updated slide later to the professors here.
Yeah, professors, I opened all the slides I prepared last week. So
Prof,
I realized at the middle of my tomato, so a little bit
Prof,
panic. Sorry
there's
about
nothing to sorry, Prof.
that. No,
You've
no.
done a good job. Yeah,
No,
you've
so,
shared your
sorry
idea.
to myself. Sorry
Okay.
to myself. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Rafi, arigatou
Thank you.
gozaimasu.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Prof.
Arigato, thank you.
Sensei.
Bye.
Thank you,
Arigato.
Rafi.
ありがとうございました。
ありがとう、日本語で。失礼します。
Thank you,
Thank you,
Sensei.
Sensei.
Arigato
Bye.
gozaimasu.
Oh ya, izin live ya, Mas Ari.
Ya,
Terima
ya,
kasih
makasih banyak ya.
banyak.
Makasih
Mantap.
banyak.
Siap.